Back again for another video. So, on this conversation, we will be talking a little bit about dysfunction. I want to dive into the ramifications of dysfunction. Dysfunction is, to me, like a parasite. It's a parasite that causes you to further act on your dysfunction, thus exacerbating the reason for the dysfunction in the first place. A lot of people don't view it this way, but that's actually the truth of how I see it. When it comes to dysfunction, it's oftentimes viewed as a choice. In some cases, it can be. I want to also look at dysfunction in the comparison to drug addiction. I've talked about this a few times on my channel before, but this time I want to make a dedicated video, especially for my thoughts on this. So, how I view it as a parasite and how I view it as a drug addiction, because I've said once before, without the parasites, without the drug addiction, these people don't normally behave this way. If you were to get rid of the dysfunction, would they still be the same person that they display when they're dysfunctional? Of course not. So you have to view it in a sort of way that separates the dysfunction from the person, because the dysfunction is not the person. Everyone has dysfunctions. Just think about if you were defined by your dysfunction as regards to what your personality is. That would be completely unfair. And I learned this from having PTSD myself from the military. It's sort of the same. With PTSD, you experience a unrealistic version of the reality. And this causes you to react irrationally. And when you react irrationally, you further, most times, exacerbate the problem that occurs. It's almost like a positive feedback loop where you experience some behavior or you output some behavior because of a prior experience or some circumstances that led you up to the grooming of accepting this as being normal in your eyes. And you make situations based on that pivot point. And the situations cause you to have more trauma. Thus, you are now more prone to having PTSD episodes because of the exacerbation that you caused on the initial trauma that is now bigger than what it once was before. This is how it works for a lot of women. Now, I had a conversation not too long ago on another channel where there was a discussion about these women not having a choice whether to be dysfunctional or not. I agree in a very, in a very fundamental aspect of it. I can agree in that. But when you dive a little bit deeper, and actually a whole lot deeper, you would come to see that these women are most times afflicted by social grooming and social programming. We had a problem with the treatment of our people when it came to their drug addiction, because we didn't agree for them to be locked up. We didn't agree for them to be scrutinized and criticized for having an addiction. And if you notice how society is nowadays when it comes to addiction, when it's no longer the majority of Black people who are addicted to very detrimental drugs, that everyone is in their coddling phase. We no longer socially view it as a criminal offense to have an addiction, right? So we socially evolved to understand that the addiction is not the person, but rather the circumstances that cause the addiction are the things that need to be addressed, and the addiction itself, of course, as well. This is no different than dysfunction. Like I said, a lot of people believe that these people, men and women, because we both suffer from it, but in regards to this topic, we're talking about women, that they have ultimate authority and choice of whether they want to engage. This is not true for a majority of them. This is how I understand it, because I myself, once again, have been through similar circumstances. This is why I can talk on addiction. Not necessarily that I have an addiction, but on the fact that when you have a dysfunction, the dysfunction becomes the new normal. And when you don't have that dysfunction, you tend to lash out. You tend to act irrationally, more irrationally, and it causes more issues. The reason why I liken it to an addiction is because, once again, this is the person's normal view of reality. Once they start to get into different environments and they are around different people who don't experience or share the same dysfunctions as they do, then they can make a differential decision about who they are versus their environment. But most time, these women and sometimes men, like I said, are in nothing but environmental echo chambers. This is where the environment gives you feedback that biasly validates the way that you perceive reality, even though that you're functioning off a dysfunction in the first place and until the conclusion that you come to. Once again, people don't see this as an addiction, but it is. Because what do addictions do to people? Well, like I explained earlier, if you separate a person from the addiction, and you examine them as an individual without an addiction, would that person be completely different from the person who was addicted? Of course. We've seen what addiction does to people. We've seen the irrationality that comes with addiction. We see all of the downfalls, the self-destruction. We see this. This is no different than dysfunction. The only thing that's different about dysfunction in regards to how it manifests and how it exhibits is because it's internal rather external. People oftentimes, when I told them, that I had really bad PTSD, they discounted it as an injury. They didn't include it as an injury for a long period of time. And now we realize through the advancement of psychology and sociology that these are injuries, but they're not the injuries that you think of. They're the injuries of the perception of reality and the mind, the self-image versus the environment. Those are where the images are, where the damage is. Just because you don't necessarily see a scar on someone doesn't mean that they're not a damaged person. And this goes the same as dysfunction. We often talk about the women who are very good looking, who can pull any man any day because just based on their looks alone. But we, on the back end, will scrutinize their dysfunction and say that you shouldn't be with that type of woman regardless of how good she look. I often advocate for the same thing. But there is a difference in the reasons, because oftentimes people tend to pick and choose who they will deal with based on their dysfunction. If they feel like this woman's trade-off for what she has to offer, in so many words, her looks, maybe some money, is good enough for a person to deal with their dysfunction, they'll choose that. But then later complain about the outcome. What I'm saying here is that I've seen it plenty of times in this space where men jump on this high righteous horse of, oh, I'll never deal with this type of woman, but you have a history of dealing with those type of women. I don't understand it, but I'm not here to scrutinize men at this time. I'm here to talk about dysfunction, whether it be male or female, but I have a focus on the women because it seems to be that just because a person is dysfunctional, they are completely in charge of their dysfunction. This is not true. This is once again no different than addiction. How we treat it and how we sometimes still treat people who have addictions. We once again put them down and say that, doing drugs is a choice. I agree. But it's kind of different when, studies are showing once again that people who do alcohol, who smoke cigarettes, who have done drugs, who have children, their children are more predispositioned to take up those same things. And they also found that this becomes genetic after a while. So why can it be any different for dysfunctions? I mean, that would be a good indicator to show why our community is so firmly sat in solidarity when it comes to the same types of dysfunctions. Why is it that we share these things no matter where you go in the United States? You can go to Cali and see the same dysfunctions that you can see in Georgia, Detroit, Chicago, same places. Is it really the culture? Nah. Because if it really was the culture, those who have taken up the culture, who are not from the culture, would experience those same dysfunctions, but they do not. So what else is the correlation that we can make here? Is that, once again, this is something that is passed down. This is something that is socialized. This is something that is very intrinsic, that people are not in charge of. Because if we were, why can't we just stop our community from being attacked to pick a gender? Why can't we just stop all the twerking? Why can't we just stop all the killings that happen? Why can't we just stop it? I've never met a person who rightfully will agree to harm someone who did not deserve it. I've never met a person like that, especially in the Black community, is what I'm talking about. But why is it that we see these things happening? Somebody's not being honest. That would indicate that they are showing a bias from their dysfunction, from what they truly are as a person. You are not your dysfunction. No one is. And to claim that people have control over these things most times is to not address the problem. Because once again, I'm treating this like this is a drug addiction. Because when you have these dysfunctions, there are certain chemicals that get released and your body becomes accustomed to these things. Studies have shown this, that when you undergo certain levels of pain, your body gets used to that threshold. It's no different than smoking weed. From a day one smoker to a person who's been smoking for 20 years, they can hit the same amount of THC and not experience the same type of high. But yet people will say this is a difference in tolerance. This is a difference in the metaphysical intake of these things, what they do to the body and mind. But I'm here to say that this is a difference of what you're accustomed to. But I figured that I would do this video because I hear a lot of people talking about it. I mean, like I said, I've mentioned it many times in the past, and I think people have the wrong take on dysfunctions. This is why I am able to change dysfunctions, because it's no different than a mechanic. To be a good mechanic, you need to understand how something runs and why it runs the way it does. To understand how to build and tear down an engine is a good mechanic, and get it to run just like it was or even better before. So in order to understand dysfunction, you have to be able to understand it from all its parts, from the bottom to the top, and be able to break them down and remanifest them at will. I am able to do that. It took many years. It took much separation from the dysfunction that the Black community has for me to be able to do this. This is why my imprinting techniques are so thorough. because I am able to get and talk to the actual person. I don't talk to anyone's dysfunction. I treat them like demons. Get beneath me, right? I don't tend to entertain people's dysfunctions either. I want to talk to the actual person. And I've learned how to do this many times in many years. There have been many women who have told me that I talk to them in such a way that no one else does, that it bypasses a lot of the things that they try to hold up as a defense. That's because I'm good at what I do. But anyways, wanted to get that video out of the way. Figured I had a nice little quiet space to actually not have to deal with billions of cars going down my street that somehow all have a exhaust problem. But anyways, I hope this video finds you well. I hope that there's much understanding to be had, maybe some conversations behind it, because we need to readdress how we view dysfunction. Yes, some people are making a choice to indulge in their dysfunction willingly, but a vast majority who are afflicted by their dysfunctions are not, especially the women. But I'm not making no excuses for them, because there are too many outlets to get these things fixed, such as psychology, a lot of people's channels. We talk about these things all the time. So when the message actually reaches the person who's in charge before the dysfunctions, and you choose not to make the decision to change, I no longer can advocate for you. But anyways, this has been a Wolf and Made of Clothes. Like, comment, and share. But until next time, have a good day, and peace be with you.